Hi, I'm Pete Lockett, here on Musicians on the Record. Great honour to be here with David. Hit it.
Hi, welcome to Musicians on the Record. I'm David Ward. This is the show where we get the musician's story, and I'm so excited. On the show today, I have seen this guy playing for years on drummerworld.com, all over the internet. Pete Lockett, drummer, world percussionist, playing with folks like Robert Plant, Jeff Beck, and doing Hollywood movies like the James Bond movies. Pete, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thanks for inviting me on. Great to be here.
A pleasure to have you here. You're very busy. I'm looking at some of this stuff that you're doing, working with Robert Plant, Jeff Beck, Bjork, Peter Gabriel, Steve Gadd, and more. Tell me a little bit about how did you get to be where you are today? How did that start for you?
Well, it was a very long, and slow process in actual fact. I was a very late starter in the first instance. I didn't actually start drumming till 19. So, a very late starter in terms of, actually making a career out of it and, professional, direction. So I was just walking past a drum shop one day in Portsmouth, where I come from, and I saw a sign in the window. It said drum lesson, £5. So I was in there, and 2 weeks later was in a punk band and had found a whole direction for my life.
Wow. So what were you doing before 19, before the drum bug hit you?
Nothing really. I obviously was working. I worked on the docks in Portsmouth, where I come from, Portsmouth, Hampshire, England. Just a normal, average life, really. Pretty directionless, actually, to be perfectly frank with you.
I hear you. I've been there. Was there any music in your family that guided you or anything like that?
Yeah, no, it's strange because it was a very unmusical family. We didn't really have music in the house, or there were no musicians in my certainly not in my local direct family. In my extended family that I didn't know at the time, transpired that there were many musicians, but certainly when I was a kid, there was no music in my life, virtually.
Okay. So this is pretty amazing then. This hit you hard when you saw the drum lessons. What was that first lesson like? Who was that teacher?
It was a guy called John Hammond. There's a great local guy in Portsmouth. And, he was just very down to earth. And the thing about it is, though, is when for me, it was the first thing that totally made sense to me and was totally, touched my heart. It made sense to me technically and emotionally and physically, and the mechanics of it made sense. The whole thing just seemed obvious,
That's amazing. And so it was a regular drum kit?
Yeah, regular drum set. Yeah, that's what I started out on. Yeah.
Amazing. What kind of music were you into and listening to at that point?
Well, that was my punk phase. So that was I was in a punk band 2 weeks later. Smashing the drums up after the gigs and proper full on. From that to North Indian classical music in
wow.
a few years.
And that's quite a switch from punk to classical music.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
I would say, at the end of the day, that the spirit beneath it, the spirit, the music making spirit, it's an outpouring of energy, an outpouring of emotion and energy, and I think that when you get like a folk music or punk music or different types of music that haven't necessarily gone through a great educational process, the energy underneath it's the same. It's just when you get into a more educated musical zone, then you've got more articulation. It's just articulated with a little bit more finesse, but it doesn't actually change the spirit of it underneath.
Oh, and so at that point when you were in punk bands, did you have a vision or a dream of where you wanted to go with music, or you were just in the moment having fun bashing drums?
No, almost from the first lesson or the first few lessons. I only had 3 or 4 lessons in the beginning before I was going out and gigging and stuff. It was basic stuff, but all the same. But no, I didn't have all I knew was that that's what my life was about, and that's what I was going to do with my life. I just suddenly knew it in that, the light bulb moment, the eureka light bulb goes on. This is what I'm going to be doing. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life,
And never looked back.
Yeah.
And so when this drum bug hits you and you're doing all this stuff, what are the folks saying of like, Mom and Dad, I'm hitting the road and be a punk drummer? Or
well, I'd left home at 16, so that was that wasn't so much of an issue. But the certainly when you come out of a working class environment, it's often the case that it's one of the hardest environments to escape from, because everybody's putting you down the whole time, because you're wanting to I think people see it as though you're wanting to escape from that environment or stuff. Well, actually I was, but
right.
But the point of it is that it's not that, it's that if you've got like some ambition, I think, sometimes people see it as a negative for them because they haven't got ambition and are happy to carry on doing, whatever it is they do for the rest of their lives, which is all well and good. I'm not dismissing that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Right. Some people want to do, want to go over the horizon rather than just look at it.
Right. Yeah, it's tough to leave your tribe sometimes, right? And that's not always easy. People feel like you might think you're better than or whatever, but you just wanted to play drums, it sounds like.
Absolutely. That's it. Yeah.
My first thought when I think of Pete Lockett is not a punk drummer. I mean, you're like a world-class percussionist, not only this amazing drum set that you have, but tablas and all of that other stuff. Where did that shift happen?
Well, that was a lot further on because, I moved to London like about a year after I started drumming. So I moved from Portsmouth to London. It's about 70 miles. I didn't know anyone, didn't have any money. It was all a very hard move. Yeah. And, just started trying to, get gigs and work with different people and trying to get on and do stuff. And, it was a very, very, very slow process. It was 10, 15 years before anything really decent happened in terms of me getting a gig that was a decent gig. So, you've got to be very patient with all that stuff. Yeah. So actually what happened, it was quite by chance, a little bit like the drum lessons, because that was drum set the whole way through that first period in London. And then one day there was a big festival of India in Alexander Park in London. And there was a free concert, and I heard it from my friend's house, and we walked over there, and it was amazing. It was Zaki Hussain, the great tabla master Zaki Hussain, and the late great Ali Akbar Khan, who plays an instrument called the sarod. So Zaki Hussain, the great tabla player. And I was like, wow, it completely blew my mind. And I kind of made a mental note of it. And then a few weeks later, in the flat that I lived in Tottenham, in North London, a newspaper had come through the front door, and fallen open on the mat, and there was a big advert for tabla lessons. So it was kind of like a weird calling again, the drum set with the thing in the window and then the tabla. Yeah. And so I went down, and that was the start of it. That was the start of my proper percussion, education.
Amazing. Yeah, now tabla is a very difficult instrument to play. I just had the pleasure of interviewing Krishna Das a few weeks ago and was talking with him and his tabla player, Arjun. And the Indian music is a complex music to play.
Yeah.
Did you find that to be true when you first started, or even now?
Yeah, the thing, every single thing about tabla and Indian music and the whole, the whole package of it all, the culture, learning the culture, all the different things, there's a massive amount of complexity. Even learning tabla as an instrument, the basic strokes can, take you 2 years even to get familiar with how to even strike the drum. Then there's the complexity of the rhythm, there's the complexity of how the music works. The music works in a very different way than jazz, for example, or Western rock, or, different types of music. Then culturally, there's all these different things. And you've got to bring all of these things and slowly just learn little bits of them. So on the plus side of that, I found it very, very enchanting and curious to learn all these new things and slowly pick away at them.
And did you have teachers that were inspiring you as well?
Yeah, I had. Well, I started off with the North Indian system, North Indian Hindustani, which is the tabla. And I had a great teacher called Yusuf Ali Khan, and he was very giving and very, very generous in his sharing his knowledge. You can't learn tabla without a teacher. Indian music, you can't learn without a teacher. Jazz you can learn without a teacher. Drum set you can learn without a teacher, and that's not belittling that system or that instrument. It's just that's how it is. Indian music, forget it. Right. No chance. Absolutely zero chance. There's just too much. It's just too there's too much detail and there's too much formality and regulations, rules and regulations, and the way it's all structured. So then I had a South Indian teacher called Karakudi Krishnamurti, and I studied South Indian music. And basically I took 6 years out and I just did that the whole time. I didn't work, I didn't do anything, just lived very simply, had 4-hour lessons a week, and just, shed with everything and got it together,
Amazing. And did you go to India also to learn?
No, I learned, entirely in London, although I've been to India 40 times since and I think I've had 12 or 13 albums out there in the last 15 years. So I've been there a lot, worked with a lot of the great classical artists and the top names. So it's an honor actually to play with them and work with them,
Sure, no question. Yeah, it's amazing to go from, it sounds like, the punk, which is, you can do pretty much no training on the drum set, to very structured, regimented Indian music, which, you 4 lessons, 4 hours at a time a week. That's amazing. That's a lot of discipline.
It's a lot of information. Yeah, a lot of information. Yeah.
You must love
it.
It's
overwhelming, actually.
I bet. Yeah. How do you integrate? Because I've seen you play on a kit and you have this amazing hybrid. It might be one of your kits, but it's a hybrid of, I guess, East and West, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's I've called it like the contraption, Dom Famularo calls it the, 21st century contraption, he calls it. There's no kick drum. So it's a little bit based along the lines of the Trelock Gertu drum set, where the kick drum actually is 12 by 2, but it's placed where the small tom would be.
But it's still pretty deep.
At this moment in time, I'm just going off on tour for the next month with solo stuff, and that's all going to be percussion and regular drum set, actually. So it's kind of, it's always changing. That's the great thing about being a percussionist. Your setups are always changing.
So talk a little bit about the tour that's coming up, please. And what will people expect when they go to a Pete Lockett show?
Yeah, well, hopefully a lot of variety, a big smorgasbord of world percussion and world rhythms. For me, it's about, I want to kind of take, I want to aim what I do, not at the totally organized, structured, rule-based side of it, and not at the totally free side. So kind of in the middle, where you're bringing some of the attitude of punk or that the anger and the energy, and also then the intellectual stuff, and kind of bring that together into a package, and then also have a concept of being completely free to bring different sounds together, different cultural instruments and different sounds and different rhythms from different part of the world. So Indian rhythms on cajon or bongos, or more Latin American rhythms on Indian instruments. So a real mixture of instruments and sounds and a lot of things that kind of interact with one another and, give birth to lots of new kind of opportunities of sound. Amazing. And you have a new book that's coming out soon, I believe, your second book of the year on Hudson music? Yeah, there's two this year. The first one was Bars, Beats and Building Blocks, and it's kind of actually my first book was with Hudson, and that was Indian Rhythms for the Drum Set, but that was a very detailed and in-depth, quite not complicated, but maybe a little bit complicated here and there in terms of where I aimed it. And so the second one, Bars, Beats and Building Blocks, is kind of breaking down some of those units into a more simplified approach, so people can take different components and more readily and easily apply it to the drum set or other percussion. And the other thing I've done with that book is, instead of using the syllables, the phonetics that you find in Indian rhythm work, I've used numbers instead. So because I've found that with a lot of Western drummers, they're kind of, sometimes you get a reluctance as soon as you hear the phonetics. Some people are fascinated by it, and some people think, oh, well, I don't want to learn that, because they hear the phonetics and they, I don't want to learn that, I just want to play the drum set. So to be able to take, my goal actually with the first book, Indian Rhythms for the Drum Set, really was to kind of take some of the core components, some of the core rhythmic systems and the way that they would do stuff, within Indian rhythm, and apply that to the drum set. So extract those concepts and apply them to the drum set. But one of the things that I used in that process was the syllables. So with the new book, I've kind of got a simplified batch of material, but I've used counting in instead.
Okay. Can you give us a short example of the difference between the phonetics and the numbers?
Well, for example, if you were to do, 3-3-2 in a row, so takita, takita, tina, takita, takita, tina, takita, ta, and then, but if you were to count it, obviously 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So people can, I think people, if they've not learned any Indian music, they can understand the concept a little bit, faster. And so for me, all that matters in education, all that matters is that you get the message across to the recipient. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you have to slightly change the way you present something some of the time. You have to adjust from student to student on a personal lesson scenario. And in terms of a written publication or an online lesson or something like that, then you've got to try and think about, you've got a wide selection of people from beginners to advanced, and you've got to kind of work, go through the stream of that to try and give something for everyone.
And how did you make the shift from playing to teaching as well? Because not everybody does. And you're not just teaching out of your basement, Pete. You're lecturing at the Royal College, the Royal Academy of Music, and Guildhall School of Music in London. How did all that come about?
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't do that much teaching. What I do is lectures, like you say, lectures, and I'll do small workshops. I've got a few private students, but not many. I mean, I don't advertise. I don't seek students. But if people contact me, then we see if we make something work. What happens most of all is someone will come over from, I don't know, Denmark or Holland or America or different places and spend a week and do 4-hour days or something like that. So that's kind of a good way to do it. It actually, I was teaching more before I started to get decent gigs and decent stuff like that. That was kind of how I made my living before I started to get the breaks into the session world and all that stuff.
How did some of those gigs come about, and what advice might you give to other musicians of getting some of those gigs?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of elements there. The first is that it's kind of random, really. You can have a preconceived plan of this is what I'm going to do. But that doesn't always work, so sometimes it's just random. I was doing some drum workshops in schools. This is many, many years ago, before I'd really done anything. And the drummer I was doing the workshop, I was doing percussion, he was doing drum set. And his roadie was married to Bjork's manager. So I was doing these workshops that I think actually these are, they were pretty crummy, to be honest. I remember a great big fight breaking out with the kids in one of them. It was like a football match. I was just telling you, like heavy duty workshop. During the time, I was trying to show them the Arabic rick, delicate little hand frame drum that's very quiet. And it's, I'd love to have a video of that, because it's just the irony of it. I'm just playing this quiet little tambourine, and then suddenly this great big fight breaks out, involving the teachers as well, I might add.
Really? Oh, lovely.
Yeah, education. Yeah, we're doing it right. Anyway, he was. So that's how I got the recordings with Bjork in the beginning. Because it's random. You rely on luck as much as you can. Your skill. But what I would say is that a lot of people are of the mentality to think, when the opportunity comes along, then I'll put the effort in to get up to the level. And, that's not the case. You've got to be ready, at any time. Someone comes and pulls you out of bed in the middle of the night and says, look, you've got to do, there's an audition for this band that really would work for you. Even if it's the middle of the night, you still got to play 80%. So you've got to be ready. You've got to put the work in and do all the bodybuilding and all the hard work in your 20s and 30s, younger as well, of course, but that's what you've got to do. Now, the other thing in terms of giving advice to people is that it's such a rapidly changing industry. Like all at the time, everything's changing. The technology, the way that, performances are the way that gigs happen, everything's changing the whole time. Studios are going bust right, left and center here, for example, same everywhere, yeah. So it's kind of a difficult thing to say to someone, no, well, this is what you need to do, and you know, even if you say, oh, well, some people have gone and made themselves, you know, publicly noticeable by putting videos on YouTube, for example, or becoming like an internet sensation with this or that, you know. But then who knows, I could say, oh, work on social media, do all this thing. But who knows, in 3 or 4 years' time, there'll be something that comes along that'll be redundant, and there'll be something different, you know.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But one of the things you're talking about, though, is the power of networking. You know, doing that school gig, even though it incited riot, you know, you were networking, and years later, somebody remembered you, and that connection to Bjork happened, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was at the time it happened. It happened, you know,
at the time. Yeah.
At that very time. But yeah, I think, you know, knowing people and networking and but I don't agree with some people who say you've got to do every gig that comes your way, because for me, you know, I would always get really depressed if I did gigs that I didn't like. It would really depress me. If I played music that I didn't like, it would really depress me. And I think there's, you know, it's like sometimes people look at it in terms of, you know, craftsman versus artist, you know, and I think it's very important to distinguish, you know, how much of a creative person you want to be in the industry and in what you put forward. So if you feel, actually, I don't really want to be creative at all, that doesn't bother me. What I want to do is play drums like, you know, John Bonham or Steve Gadd, or, you know, I want to copy someone, you know, almost like a tribute drummer, you know, I want to be their style, I want to set up like them, then that doesn't actually matter so much. You can kind of do any gigs that are relevant, you know, to that. But if you're going to want to start composing and writing music and developing more of your own style, then I think you've got to be a lot more focused on what gigs you take on and what you do. And also, even if you do the craftsman type gigs, you know, the social club gigs or the cover band gigs and stuff like that, you've just got to be aware of them and compartmentalize them in a way that keeps your mind clear. I mean, I would do that with sessions, because a lot of sessions, excuse me, some of them did involve, you know, a creative input and a compositional input, but a lot of them didn't. Mm. You know, and so for me, I always have my mental approach is that I go into the studio and, you know, I kind of think, well, basically I'm just a sound module. So basically I'm a sound module and they tell me what they want, you know, unless they allow me to compose and create and improvise, and then that's a different thing. You're in a different ballpark. And frankly, they'll get a much better result if they do. But they don't, you know, they don't always do that. But then I don't really care. You know, if they get what they want, they get what they ask for. Job's done, you know.
Right. Can you talk about, whether it's the music business or your music, just some of the other challenges or obstacles that you have been through and learned from?
Well, I think psychologically, you know, in the beginning, you know, if things aren't happening, you know, it's really easy to beat yourself up. And also imagine that nothing's ever going to happen, because that's the easiest thing to imagine. I mean, we look, depending on what positive, you know, affirmations we've got in our life before. You know, for me, I came out of an environment where there were no positive affirmations whatsoever. It was a dreadful education, dreadful period of time. And so there weren't really any positive affirmations for me to look, to refer to. So when you're moving forward and suddenly you've got a bit of ambition and you want to do something, then it's a real psychological battle to be able to, you know, have the strength to work it through psychologically and see a positive path forwards.
How did you persevere then? And were there times that you did feel like, I'm going to chuck the whole thing and going to give up? And
I never felt like I was going to chuck it in, because I said when I came to London, and it might sound a bit extreme, but it is the truth, that I'm going to do this or die. And I was so uncompromising that, you know, I was never going to take a day job, you know. So there was, I'll do this or I'll die. And I also remember when I did my first solo gig at the Festival Hall, one of the halls at the Royal Festival Hall in London, South Bank Centre. I always remember saying to my friend, you know, I could easily have been in this hall, but I could easily have been under the bridge as well, you know, on a cardboard box, you know. Right. But I accepted that at the beginning, you know, that's what it was, you know, you do it or for me, it was you do it or couldn't really be bothered with an ordinary life.
Right. But it sounds, you did it for the love, the passion that you have for music.
Yeah, I mean, I think it chooses you, because I think, what did I choose music? It chose me,
right?
And then you kind of you're in the service of it, really.
Yeah, right. It could have been anything at 19 when it could have been a plumbing store or whatever that you walked by and said, "Hey, I want to go apprentice there," right? But it was drums, thankfully.
And if that, I'd be interviewed now on plumber.com or something. They say, "Why do you keep hitting the pipes with drumsticks?" What's that about?
Maybe you could add that to your act, Pete.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
Bring in some pipes. Pretty cool. People would just think that's another percussion instrument, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about some of the albums that you've made, too. How many albums now?
It's over 20. I mean, it's 12 or 13 in India in 15 years now. So, yeah, 20, more than... 20. There's
That's
two
incredible.
new ones this year coming out. One duo with Lewis Conti called Boom, which is a great honour to work with such a great percussionist such as Lewis Conti. And then there's a quartet with Mino Sanelu. There's a guy called Lee Mullen, who's a great British percussionist. Lewis again is on that, Lewis Conti and myself. There's a quartet, percussion quartet. I'm just starting a new one with Randy Gloss, who's a great percussionist from California, he'd be good for your show, actually, to be honest. He's a professor at head of percussion I think he's head of world music at Cal Arts in California, taking over from the great esteemed John Bergamo, of course. So yeah, lots of pies in the oven.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really incredible. Tell me about your process of making these albums. Are you writing all of this, or somebody else co-writing these with you? How does that work?
It's a mixture. If the Lewis one, for example, he kind of presented 4 ideas. I presented 4 ideas. Then we had a solo each, and I think we added another idea each or something like that. So that was kind of with the thing with Randy. In fact, I've just sent the first track over to Randy today for that album. That'll be middle to end of next year, I think. And that was it's strange because it's a track that I'd written based on Morse code.
Really?
And so it starts the idea of short, long, long. So you can keep the pulse the same. So if it's if you've got like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2, then you could have that's 3 3 2. You could just easily as have 4 4 3. So you keep the pulse the same. Takatina, takatina, takata, takatina, takatina, takata, takatina, takata. There's the 4 4 3. Takatina, takatina, takata. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3. Taka 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2. So this the same pulse. It's like a Morse code, which is the Morse code for D, but you just change the length of the units within the pulse by adding 1 each time. So you kind of get a completely different group. So it's funny because I sent him this track and I said, I was thinking about Morse code and got this idea for a track, and then he bizarrely sent me a picture of his notebook, and he said, this is really strange because it was a picture of his jottings on Morse code. I've just been thinking about a piece using Morse code.
Kismet, huh? Unbelievable. That's
yeah.
Wow. Let's talk about some of the artists that you've worked with as well. What was the work that you did with Robert Plant?
Yeah, I mean that was a lot of the names on my CV are sessions. So from early on I stopped touring with anyone, bands, because I didn't like touring in that way. I didn't really. Normally the management people would put me off. They were the people that I couldn't really hack at all.
In what way? In what way, can I ask?
Yeah, it's just difficult in terms of when you get famous people and then you get people around them who are absolutely lovely with the idea that they can be with these famous people. Then it can lead to a degradation of their moral character.
That's a nice, polite way to say it.
Yeah, so it wasn't for me. That and also with the changing environment, around that time, that was sessions started to change, the scenario of sessions, and I was at that point I was doing 50% solo work and 50% kind of studio work, and for me to do the solo stuff, if I took like a 6-month tour or something like that, it means I'm denying myself solo opportunities, and even if I get less money doing the solo opportunities, that was more important for me. So that was,
I think
the
that's
Robert Hart thing was with, there were a few tracks. One of them was with the Afro Celt Sound System, that band. And Bjork was the post album.
So we would hear your drumming and percussion on that album.
Percussion, not drumming.
Percussion.
Yeah, all my session work was percussion.
Percussion, okay.
Yeah.
And Jeff Beck as well?
Jeff Beck was a kind of best of album that he was doing. I never got a copy of it actually, but it was he was doing like a revision set of tracks and stuff like that.
Yeah. And Peter Gabriel and Steve Gadd as well.
Well, Steve Gadd, that was, that's much more closer to my heart, That was an amazing thing. That was at the Croatia drum camp, and we spent a week, El Negro, myself, and Steve Gadd, we were teaching, and then at the end, in the, final night, we played together, the three of us. That's for me, playing with Steve Gadd, for me, he's the ultimate icon of drumming, the one person who's come in and, I don't think there's anyone else in the history of drumming, however far back, Western drum set playing, who's completely changed the direction of the instrument that much. Drummers have changed the direction of the instrument, but Steve Gadd, if you listen to any drummer today, you'll hear some Steve Gadd in the approach and in the thing. Just literally a total legend. Yeah. So to play with him was amazing.
Sure. What did you learn from?
Such a lovely person.
Yeah. What did you learn from Steve?
Well, I think a lot of people, obviously you could learn from everything that he says, and he's such a wise and thoughtful, philosophical sort of character. But, he's so humble, he's like a drumming god, more than, you can imagine. But he's like a super humble person. And we could all learn to be, a little bit humble.
Yeah. Are there other drumming inspirations in addition to Steve? Obviously, both just drum set and or classical or percussion music as well.
Yeah, well, many. If you go, there's too many to list or discussing. But obviously, great players such as Zakir Hussain, the great tabla master. T.H. Viku Vinayakram is the great Gatam player. Is a great inspiration, and again, it reminds me a little bit of Steve Gadd in this personality, very humble and welcoming, and amazing person. There's a great Kanjira player, South Indian Kanjira, small handheld tambourine. Great player. Sadly, that no longer with us. His name's Harry Shankar, and just like brilliant players. My first ever drum hero, I think, was Keith Moon when I was a kid. That was what. I used to have a Keith Moon tattoo back in the now. They're all covered up with new tattoos, but did have a Behind Blue Eyes, which is the track from Won't Get Fooled Again. Who's Next? I think.
Yes.
Dedicated to Keith Moon.
Right.
So there's so many, and you go through percussionists like John Bergamo and Glenn Velez, who kind of really invented this modern world of frame drumming that we have in the West, drawing from the traditional cultures of the, Arabic world and also with the Indian kind of influence. And so many amazing players.
Sure. Yeah, incredible. And so, doing a mix of session work and solo work, let's focus on the session work a little bit. How did it come to be where you got into doing movie soundtracks with percussion?
Well, that's what, all the session thing is word of mouth. And I think a lot of the, once you start doing sessions, if you do a good job and you provide something that's unique, people are always going to call you back and refer you and discuss discuss you to other people and suggest you to other people and stuff like that. So that's how a lot of the film stuff worked. I mean, originally I worked with David Arnold on Shaken Not Stirred album. He was the guy who composed a lot of music for a lot of the Bond films. Shaken Not Stirred album of Bond tracks. And then from there I started, just doing all the films that he did,
And what's that process like, Pete? They give you the movie first and you're watching it and then you get some creative ideas. How does that work?
It's different. Depends on who the composer is and how well you know them, actually. I mean, with David, I knew him very well. So, he would actually ask me to do ideas before. So I'd do a few days just putting down rhythmic ideas that he would use to write to. So that'd be at the beginning of the 3-month, 4-month process. And then at the end of the process, after the orchestra's down and everything's done, then I'd go in and add other stuff and do other things. Other films, I've just done the Mowgli film, the new Mowgli film that's coming out soon. That's just you go in and you just put stuff on top of what's already finished. I think that was one of the last things to go down on that film. So each film, is a different process. Some of them are to picture. I always go in as a soloist. I'm not really a sort of go in with the orchestra sort of guy. So yeah, it's always an interesting and different process. You've got to be flexible and you've got to have lots of ideas and.
The other very cool thing that I was seeing in doing my research was this app called Drum Jam.
Yeah.
Looks very cool. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, it's a good app. I mean, actually, it does very well. On our last update, we were top 5 in 40 countries for a week. So I mean, the app does really well. And even now, it's probably 4 or 5 years old now. It's 4 years. It's always being updated, of course. There's not really any competition for it. Strangely, But the thing about it is that it's all acoustic audio, so it's all recorded audio. So there's lots of loops and stuff like that, and effects and pitch shift and stuff like that you can do by putting all these multiple loops into a XY axis window of volume and pan. And then there's a set of solo pads, so you can solo over the top. But again, this is all instruments. I mean, there's literally hundreds of instruments, especially if you get the in-app purchases as well. Don't forget to get those, everyone. So yeah, but they're all like 30 layers deep of velocity. So it's a brilliant top end thing, and of course you can record it all. You can upload it to SoundCloud. You can email the recordings. And there's also a lot of, it's very good for educational purposes because there's a huge kind of like library of information about the instruments and how to play them and stuff like that in the app. So, I mean, it's like, was it like $10, I think? I mean, what can you get for, you're going to go into Starbucks and not come out far short of that, are you?
Exactly.
Assuming you go into Starbucks.
Right. And you get a whole world of music with that. And what kind of instruments? Obviously, world percussion instruments?
Yeah, everything. There's loads of drum sets as well. There's like Russ Miller's done drum sets, Johnny Rabb, KJ Sorka, many people have got drum sets, but they're really super, velocity deep. So you can trigger that with your Roland or whatever, and you get, brilliant drum sets, like really good drum sets available. So that, that's one thing. But then all sorts of percussion, from Indian tabla to pakawaj and tuned percussion, lots of little tongue drums and, hang drums and little African balafons and just so many different things.
It's amazing. Fantastic. You were talking a minute ago about not necessarily wanting to tour with a band versus solo, and because some of the management, other people's management issues, hopefully you have a good manager, but yeah. So that's, to me, that's really brave, especially as a drummer of like, no, I don't want to go play in a band. I mean, you are a whole sort of orchestra in and of yourself, right?
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that people can't, sometimes people, you get into your career and certain things start to happen. And, because the river's going a certain way, doesn't mean that you've got to carry on. You could walk across land for a bit and jump in another river. A lot of people think, oh, you're doing this, so this is what you have to do. If you're a drummer, then you have to do this gig, you have to do this, and you have to do that. You don't have to do anything. You do whatever you want. You make your career what you want it to be. It's like sculpting it in the way that you want it to suit your life and suit what you want to do.
See, I think that's great advice right there. And for you, how do you tap into that? Is that just an intuitive thing? Is that just a strong feeling of, you know what, I don't want to do this, I want to do that?
Well, I think after years, you know what you do and don't want to do up to a point, And I think one of the important things for me is trying to discover new horizons. So, for me, I've gone in depth into the Indian thing, for example. But for now, at this point in my life, I'm wanting to veer in a different direction and veer more towards the, improvisational and the less regulated, less formalized, less structure. I'm always going to have structure in what I do. It's unavoidable, but I'm wanting to move in different directions. So, for example, I'm putting a new project together with a friend of mine, and one of the ideas is that we'll have the sound engineer will become an integral part of the unit, and so the music making process gets completely changed. In the sense that it's not like, oh, we've got this tune, we start here, there's the verse, chorus, and going with, and then solos and all this. That it's the music making process can get interrupted at any point by what the sound engineer brings into the scenario by taking elements of our performance. So changing what we do, so to strip away as much preconception as possible and to kind of develop in a it may be a road accident, but it hopefully not.
right, exactly. Yeah. So that's pretty amazing creative process, because I was curious of where do you want your music to go? Do you have any thought about in 5 years where you think your music will be?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would kind of get that asked, not that exact question, but similar kind of question about, into the future and what you want to do. And I'm very much a philosophical, ideally, try and really be where you are in the moment, because I think a lot of people in their lives are looking back in regret, or wishing they were back there, or looking ahead wishfully and hopefully about this, but then also side by side with that, going back to what we were saying earlier, imagining that it won't happen in a negative way, saying I'd want this but I doubt whether it will happen. So people are kind of sometimes in life are kind of marooned without the present at all, and so for me it's really important to be as rooted in the present, as I am, but because you never know what things are going to come along and change your perspective and change the way that you even think about music.
Is there, for some people, when talking about the being here now stuff, for some people there can be a spiritual element to that. Is there any of that for you and in your music?
Well, spirituality in the sense that, you feel that an energy, a life-giving energy is coming from within. I'm not a great, believer in a specified, quantified spirituality, but in terms of it being like an energy that's coming from within and your quest in the universe and your kind of discovering and receiving, and the energy of the universe that you're in, the whole kind of cyclic, exchange of energies that comes from that, and human interaction.
And definitely music can be one of those things that is a great channel for that energy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Where you're kind of tapping into a great a priori sort of emotional kind of river, gold stream, really.
Right. Exactly. When somebody goes to your show, Pete, and you're performing, what's the feeling that you would like them to have? Talking about this energy that you're experiencing while playing, what's the feeling you want somebody else to have?
Well, I think, it's funny because I was listening to interviews, I forget who it was actually. It was in Bill Bruford's book, actually. Bill Bruford's written a book about creativity, and he's got a PhD on creativity in the world of the modern drum set, basically, is the kind of premise of it. For me, and in the book it came up that a lot of people were kind of thinking the audience is this or that. And for me, I think you're going to have everything in the audience. And that's why I don't really have a particular psychological, barrier or feeling of positive or negative with an audience, because I know that in every audience there's going to be, there's going to be some people that absolutely love it. There's going to be some people that loathe it. There's going to be some people that understand it. There's going to be some people that don't understand it. There's going to be people that don't understand it and like it, who don't understand it and dislike it, do understand it and like it, do understand it and dislike it. People that resent it because they can't do it, or they didn't think of it, or, for whatever psychological reasons there might be in there. So you've got this whole myriad of possible observers. And, if you did a questionnaire, a detailed questionnaire, 100 questions after a gig of something, any gig, you'd end up with a completely different, like a really amazing spread of emotional responses to, I don't think anyone's ever done that, actually. It'd be an interesting study,
Yes, sure.
Emotional responses to percussion solo.
That's fantastic. But it sounds like you're good with that. You've got acceptance. You're just going to be you and play your music, and whoever's called to that will be called to it. Whoever is.
Yeah, you just got to be. You got to be honest. Do what you do in good faith. Give an honest performance. You're inspired. You're giving out that energy of how much you love what you're doing, and it's not a feigned thing. It's not an artificial, made up thing. It's just like, this is the energy of my performance. This reflects, what I've studied and this and that, and honestly, take it or leave it.
Right. Because either way, you're going to keep going and do your thing, right?
Because I think a lot of people get sidetracked by thinking, oh, they don't like that, so I'm going to do something different because people don't like that, so I should do what people like. Right. That's why it makes certain musical styles where there's a very specific set of rules and regulations and interpretations of musical pieces, where it's actually easy to sort of think, oh, well, I'm doing this interpretation of that piece of music, or I'm following all these rules and regulations. So, it doesn't matter if people like it or not, it's following the rules and regulations. So therefore it is good, which is a complete misconception of music entirely,
Right. You got to really do what you love and what feeds you first and foremost. And hopefully that resonates with others too. Right?
Yeah.
So if you could, I know it's a challenge to give some advice to musicians, but someone who, you're doing all kinds of amazing things, making CDs and albums, doing session work, working on movies, doing your solo performances, going on tour. What advice would you give to musicians who want to be able to do some of that?
Well, I think the first thing you've got to do is believe in yourself. I mean, that's really the absolute first paving stone you've got to put down. Because if you don't believe in yourself, then, you're really going to have a hard time, moving forwards. You've also got to believe in hope as well, that you can achieve something. So it's very easy to kind of give up and think, oh, well, I haven't done anything in a year or 6 months, so, I'm going to give up and do something that's easier, it's more direct. And we're all so used to direct things, instant downloads and, all these things. So believe in yourself, believe in the possibility that you might achieve something, and take control of the things that you can take control of. So there are certain things that you can't take control of. You might get lucky and meet, a great artist who you're on tour with the rest of your life with, or in the studio, or you might, do a record that's a gold hit and platinum hit, and you're a millionaire overnight. You can't control that. But what you can control, list down what you can control. You can control, how much hard work you put into something, You can control whether you want to go and learn with somebody, be humble and say, actually, I don't know everything. I'm not the great, who is. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to learn something different, be humble. And then, so take control of the amount of work that you're going to put in to put yourself in the best opportunity if something does come along. And the final thing I'd say is, or final two things, is be prepared, So put the work in. If you've got the time, put the work in and get yourself as prepared as possible, for, any eventuality. And you know that if you're not prepared, you might miss your only opportunity, you know, that comes your way. And finally, the other thing is be prepared for change. You know, don't have a preconception about what you think the industry is going to be, because really, honestly, in 2 or 3 years' time, even, it's going to be totally different. It's changing all the time. In my career, it's changed like almost continually by, you know, like every couple of years, it's completely different. It seems to be accelerating as well, the change.
Right.
So, yeah, but believe in yourself. That's the first step.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Pete, this has been a really incredible treat to speak with you. People, go out and see a Pete Lockett show. It's fantastic. Pete Lockett, thank you so much for being on Musicians on the Record.
Thanks, David. It's been a great pleasure.